All right, go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:02. And turn it over to Jeremy.
Okay, good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. Just as we get prepared for next week's board meeting and to start talking about the budget piece that will be there, just want to give a kind of an overview of where we're at, what our timeline and pace would be so that we're kind of teed up to be in the right spot. So we'll have a school committee meeting next Wednesday night, which my hope is that for night we will kind of look at any items that we want to talk about at the school committee meeting so that we have proper information prepared. And then Monday the 28th, we would have city council presentation. We would post for our public hearing. We have to have that public hearing on the budget, and I believe the date is April 9th is the day. Is a Tuesday night that week. Maybe it's not the 9th. Maybe it's the 12th. So we have a Tuesday meeting on the 12th of school committee, which is a change because of vacation week. And I want to be able to make sure that we're teed up and lined up to hit that date. So what my hope was tonight was just to start talking about a few of the items and some of the things that we're finding and whether we want to think about putting them in, get more information. There are things that we've all set on this for a week or so, items that you may have that we need to build more information on so that by Wednesday night we have a better idea. Now, health insurance, still nothing yet, so we know that that's a big item that we'll probably be dealing with on the night of the 12th, because I'm hopeful that we will have that number that night. Jeff and Artie, you guys spoke about special ed teacher at pre-K. And so I want to know from you guys what information you want. I know that we have some interest in that position. There's certainly a lot going on as legislation right now. I've got a meeting next Wednesday that I've got to be for part of on that. I've been in some discussions about what funding may or may not look like, but that's very unclear right now. So I do believe that we could think about having that position, and that can be an item that we bring next week. I don't know that that will need to be locally funded. It may need some local funding, but I kind of want to get some pieces. So I want to be sure about what our ask is so that we bring that back appropriately. Yeah, we're on the camera here tonight.
I would just, I don't know if there's a way to forecast the need, and plan accordingly for that. I know that's kind of what my ask would be.
Yeah, I think the forecast of need of where that information sits is a little bit difficult for us. I'm hoping that by next Wednesday, I definitely will have some more information about what funding may look like. Got a meeting Wednesday morning with MSMA on that. It looks like if things passed, it would be 2023 school year. But there's definitely some CDS funding depending on how this goes.
It looks like it's available if we would want it to be.
That's how I read it today.
Yeah.
I don't know what that structure is because obviously this whole changeover of CDS, I definitely have some concerns that if the formula is not done correctly, this hits the mill rate. And so those are the pieces that I want to have an ability to check in with the DOE. And I don't know that I will have answers immediately. But yes, I believe there could be funding that would be non-local funding available next year. And that's something that we'll explore. I don't know I'll have the answer Wednesday night, but I know that that's an item that a couple of people have shared for SDIPs.
I have a question around that too.
Yep.
So this is my billable brain thinking from when I used to do billables. What are the billable hours? Can we find out for pre-K what the billable special education hours are? And what are the rates, reimbursement rates for main care and private insurances? So we can take that into account too, because I'm guessing some of that funding that's non-local can be recouped through insurance as well, possibly?
Well, I think by 2023, that is what the plan says in the law. What I can tell you is that there's not many schools, many school departments can handle the main care piece. I don't think any of us have dived into the billing private insurance piece. I haven't heard many that have done that piece. So that will definitely be something that school departments work on, or will need to figure out how they do that piece. I'd say my biggest concern on the transition piece that's coming in the way the law's written is that we do have to have some concern about, okay, just say you have 60 kids with IEPs in pre-K, that's 60 more. How's the management of that? What's the oversight of that? And then as the billing piece, we do have some billing pieces figured out. That's with main care. Billing Anthem or whatever, Harvard Pilgrim or whatever, that's gonna take some work. So I definitely think there's a layer of administrative oversight piece that we're gonna be working on a lot over the next year if this comes 2023 to figure out. What I haven't figured out is that in some communications that we've had about this, it says that students would hit, a pre-K student would hit the ED 279, and while that's all well and good, we all know that the local share in Saco is different than the local share for reimbursement in Biddeford, which is local, which in someone like Old Orchard's case is 0 because they're a minimum receiver. And then it says special education costs would be 100% reimbursable. But where on the formula, which line, how is that calculated? There's a lot to figure out, and I don't know that those answers are gonna come by next Wednesday, or we're gonna be working on this for a while, but I do think that there are the ability to gain funding. Just don't know the method yet.
So we'd have the ability to pivot, or, you know what I mean, not knowing what's going to happen regarding the budget. We'd have the, you know, whatever ends up happening, we'll be able to kind of adapt and
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that we will be safe enough to be able to do that. You know, as you look at positions that, you know, come and go during, and there's an ebb and flow in salaries, and that piece, and we'll just try to be planful to make sure that we have that piece. Because again, you don't know how much SDI would be there available for kids, but we'll plan to have that piece on there and understanding what a cost or what a revenue would need to be to cover that piece. Okay, the second thing that I really wanted to talk to people tonight.
Hold on one second.
Yep,
Jeremy.
go ahead.
So with that being said, what can we do in the time being? Because, I mean, we're talking a whole class year that bill will be passed, and we're taking the gamble that might.
So the law wouldn't go into effect into 2023, but I think that we could work with CDS and ourselves locally to figure out to have something in place next year.
I think that's something that we need to look into.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Okay.
Just making sure we figure out what the right funding source is going to be the bigger challenge in that piece. And it's not really a challenge, it's probably more weeding through legislative and working with CDS and working with the DOE to see what the reimbursement rates are, because the law it basically says that they will work with you now. I mean, that's their intent, is just to work with districts now. But we have to make sure we have very good deals in place and it's clear how reimbursement's gonna come in.
So from the standpoint of what we're going to be able to do, is this the funding supports a specific position like we had talked about the last time, or is it along the lines of we have to be flexible because it may not actually be a position that's ours, it may be services that are billed out or something like that?
So I think that's the pieces. I don't know that it will be ours. It may be that it's billed out. It could be purchased from somewhere. It could be hours and funded from somewhere. We'll have the position, we'll figure it out, and whether we build an expense and a revenue at the same time, you might do both, so that it's there. But I feel comfortable thinking that we can get to that point, and I might learn a little bit more over the next couple of days, what's gonna happen. I know legislature is having their public work session Wednesday morning at 9:30. So by Wednesday night, I probably will at least know what their recommendation is gonna be as it goes to legislature.
Is there an open discussion, or is somebody researching the CDS contract that we have with them right now as far as billing them?
Yeah, so it's billed through Sync, but like, part of the piece, when Sync is their billing service, and like for our ed tech positions, you get so much back per 15 minutes of billable time. My concern being is that you're not gonna have enough billable time during the day to cover the full cost of salary and benefits for that position. So then that's gonna shift locally. And that's the piece that, that's the piece that school districts on a statewide scale are gonna need to figure out, because if this is, a state CDS right now is fully paid for by the state, doesn't hit locals. But as this starts hitting local municipalities, it means that, as we talked about last time, my fear was that those services would hit the 279, which then meant that boards across the state might be making decisions about staffing for those services versus capital costs, let's say. I don't like that idea, that people would have choices to, and I'm not saying they would limit or deny, but it puts it in that realm of a possibility. Like, oh, we're not gonna fund 8 positions, we're gonna fund 7 because the budget's tight this year. That's what I wanna learn more about.
So going back to the billable piece.
Yep.
Is there a way we can get some kind of rough draft number of billables, what we have currently, maybe off of this year, for special education, so we can gauge better if we want to have this position be full-time, part-time? I hear what you're saying about billables, where there might not be enough billables to pay fully for a full-time person. So that would be something I would be interested in knowing. And I get the every 15-minute thing. That's something that's typical with billing that I'm familiar with. So I'd be curious what that billable rate looks like. How many billables per hour? Is that enough to do a 40-hour work week, more or less? I'm guessing not, but I just wanted to get a rough idea of what that does look like.
But I think that's the piece, Jen, that makes me nervous about how this lands in a school department, is that on a reimbursement system is, like, right now, like, you made the comment, like, is it enough for a full-time position or a half-time position? Okay, so boards make a decision, okay, we make a decision in May, half-time position, that's what we put into the budget. But then the service requirements, because many of those IEPs happen in the springtime, don't necessarily line up with our cycle. And that's what scares me, is because now you don't have the option to say it's only going to be a half-time if you have more hours than that. If you have service requirement, this is where it's sticky, because none of the timing lines up correctly. That's why we're gonna have to think about, like, probably not a minimum, but more of like a higher end thing. And I'm saying, like, here's what the most would be. Fund at that level, hope that you get it, figure if you can negotiate timing and positions with CDS, fund that position, and move forward.
And I have an unrelated question.
Sure.
I know I'm not following the agenda.
All right.
My curiosity is, what do we have for teachers, like teacher payouts for retirements this year? Is that included in our budget? Are those positions we're gonna fill? And are we doing the same thing for not just teachers, but across the system, transportation, janitorial, maintenance, any of that happening? I was flipping through, but I couldn't put my fingers on it.
So again, on retirements, typically that would be in money that's in this current year budget. So anyone who retires and takes that piece, there's money in this budget for that. Right now, we have plans to fill everything that comes open and whatnot. Collective bargaining agreements for maintenance and transportation, Jason, they have sick day. Up to 6,000. So through Finance Committee, we'll be putting that piece as we start moving into the spring, like this is what our total, this is what we'd be anticipating for utilities. This would be, because as you get towards the end of the year, you're gonna start building those pieces while your budget is going this way. This line goes this so that we can anticipate kind of what the carryover amount may be. And depending where we are, hopefully as a Finance Committee, we'll have some conversations about, okay, if we're really healthy, is there an opportunity to look at our, say, facilities line? Has that all been spent down? Do we want to spend some of that down? Do we want to, we got a lot of catch up in facilities over time to do around here. So that's something that we'd look at. So an item that I added to the list tonight is about maintenance and custodial staff. And one of those pieces is that as we look at, we kind of had some tours around SMS, and we looked at the building and having more conversations with Mike. And we certainly always want to do a good job with our facilities piece. But we have one facilities person that is a maintenance person outside of Mike. And we were talking about square footage of our building. So we've got about over 250,000 square foot of building with one facilities person. And this was not something that was necessarily right on our radar during the budget development process. But we've been able to do some things, and we have an open custodian position. That a person left the district that's was a half-time custodian. And we'd like to bring information to you guys to look at what it would be, what additional it would take to take that half-time position, turn it into a full-time maintenance position. And what that would add, and we'd bring that to you guys next week if there's some interest in that. Because having one facilities maintenance person in a district this size, with this many schools, that's part of the challenge, that we're not staying on top of things, because there's just not enough manpower. And so we wanted to see what kind of interest the board might have in bringing some more information to looking at that piece, to see if we can make that work.
So are you referring to the open Fairfield position, just turning that into a maintenance position? Or are you,
So I'd be looking at the, on the spreadsheet, there's kind of a red line down there. And there's an open position that was district/learning center.
yep,
And so what we've done is that with pre-K, that building's about 10,000 square feet. Or actually, yeah, 10,000 or a little under that. When you look at the average for people in a custodial setting, that's a place that doesn't equal what the other square footage of people. So we've shifted a couple of hours over to the learning center for that individual so they could do both, which freed up this job that was kind of district learning center part-time. And looking to see if we could take that position, find some additional funding through an add-on, and fund a full-time maintenance person to add in the district.
so what is the salary difference between a custodian and a maintenance person?
So Jason and I were kind of just talking about that, and we'd have to look at 100%, but it would be probably somewhere between a $25,000 add to the budget at this point.
Okay. And what about that open position in Fairfield? Have we had any luck with that?
So some of that just have just opened up, and so we are advertising for those positions. First, you have sometimes some people who are working nights that may want to say, oh, I want a daytime shift, so we have to look at that internal switch that could occur. But then, yeah, filling all those positions, we need all of those filled.
right? I just meant as far as like how many people were applying. So forgive my ignorance, but are the part-time employees getting benefits?
Jason?
Okay.
So essentially, if Moore contributes 84%, they contributed 84%, but it's at halftime, it's half of the 84%. So it's significantly more on the employee, less on the employer, but it's based on the ratio of what the FTE is.
I got you. So we're not only looking at that $25,000 salary increase, but we're now also including more for
It'd be more
benefits.
benefits, but we think that 25 to, $30,000 would be both.
Okay, and what, would this increase the amount of money that we would be spending on tools and vehicles and everything like that?
I don't think it would be huge. I mean, I think some of it would be just making sure that we're on the back end of a paintbrush for certain items, looking at interior stuff in the building.
Right,
Again, we got one person who works nights that's trying to do clogs and drains and all of those pieces. That's, I mean, one person has 4 items on a list and a night shift, and you go to you go to 4 schools, your night's pretty much over. So there might be some, ideas of one, it might be about skill level on certain things, like who's got the skill and whatever the situation is. And then some may be a little bit area driven, so that, maybe you have someone working on this side and someone scheduled to do things on this side, so there's less transition throughout the city.
yeah. So when I was looking at this earlier, my thought process was going back to a conversation that we had about painting.
Yep.
And my thought is that if we go and we're basically creating another position.
Yep.
We have an opening, but we're making it a full-time. And I didn't know if maybe this was something that we could share with the city to kind of recoup those costs. Because we do have city buildings that are gonna need to be painted and maintained. I don't wanna step on anybody's toes on their end, but it might be a valuable asset for them as well. And obviously, if we can find someone with more skill level for those things, there might be a little bit more cushion for a higher salary if we're splitting it with the city. And that might entice more people, more qualified people to come over.
Can I interject here? I think with the amount of work that's required between all of our buildings, I think that person would need to be full-time with the school. I mean, just walking around Saco Middle School and seeing all the unfinished business that's going on there because I can't keep up. I don't feel like this would be necessarily a position that we could share. I mean, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel like if anything, we could share maybe somebody else, like another position maybe, but I think we need to have 2 people doing maintenance for our schools, in our schools solely, because obviously we can't keep up as it is, so.
I think we definitely need a full-time equivalent. How that full-time equivalent based off a skill set and working with the city, you may get full-time by several things, and again, I wouldn't want to speak for them in that, but, an idea would be maybe you're hiring skill X that's working, 75% of the time because it fits in the school things, and then you're trading 25% of the time for 25% of the time, something else. I mean, I'm just spitballing here, but it'd be worth conversations.
Would we anticipate that when the position gets converted or listed, that we would get to see a job description prior to that? That way we could know where the line is between what this person would do and, what normal janitorial activities would encompass.
Yeah, and I believe we have some job descriptions for those positions. This would be it's the same bargaining unit, which is a good piece, but we need to do more on our facilities ends and figure out how and again, my concern being is that patterns develop, and right now, we know that we need more there. My biggest fear is that we won't change that pattern before 5 years comes and we're moving into a new building, and just think of the square footage that could be there. We need to make sure that we're adjusting along the way so we're prepared. Because you don't want to take the same pattern and then be 10 years down the road and be looking at a new building and be like, hey, what just happened? Just kind of ramp up for that.
Yeah, I strongly agree with you. I don't doubt that there's enough work for one person, but at this rate, any position would help alleviate that. My thought process of it was, we need changes with morale. I mean, look at the middle school. We need somebody in there that's going to care about their job, and they're going to like doing it, and they're going to want to make the schools look better. And so my thinking is that with this new school coming up, maybe to alleviate our budget a little bit, if we worked with the city and we could get a top-notch employee and pay them a little bit more because we would have that cushion with the city, we might actually get somebody who wants to do that job. That's all, that's where I was going with it.
I think with the bargaining unit, though, I think that would prevent us from paying somebody more, would it not? Because unless we had some kind of agreement, but bargaining units prevent us from,
So we need to,
yeah.
if it was our employee, we would need to continue with the bargaining scale that's been negotiated. You might hire someone with a little more experience. And again, I think we have employees that work really hard and have a care for the building. We just don't have enough.
Right.
We just don't have enough in that arena. And again, custodial-wise, if you look at the industry standards that you can kind of Google industry standards of square footage for a person that's out there, we seem to be in the ballpark. We're not in the ballpark facilities-wise. Now, granted, let's also remember that the city does they do all of the grounds for us. So that's an important piece, but we still have over $250,000 square feet of space with one real maintenance person.
And
that's a tough
one person for aging buildings
Yep.
that are in dire need of,
And Mike and
Love.
Jason informed me that, again, there was some conversation a few years ago around HVAC where that position fell off.
He retired, he did all of our filters, boiler upkeep, if there's ever a problem, someone not getting heat, Scott used to run, and then on his spare time, he'd do some other small maintenance pieces. He retired, there was discussion with the city, maybe being able to farm some of that out, or maybe using some of the electrician on the city side that they have, but the electrician on the city side is just as busy. He doesn't have any time for the school side either, so I think that's what's happened over the last 2 years. But we did used to have one more maintenance person that was HV.
Depending on the skill set, it could help save some money, I would imagine, too, not having to sub out, for,
So on that, is there, and I guess if they're in the same bargaining unit, is there a way that we can kind of internally advertise for the new position amongst the custodian pool here to kind of facilitate and hopefully get this position, get somebody on board there, just thinking about in terms of maintenance, and I don't know what the pay scales are here, but a maintenance person right now is in high demand everywhere. So I would imagine the city, I don't know, but the point being that just looking at like pre-K, looks like with custodians, every school's got from 6 to 10:30 as coverage, but a pre-K is a quarter of in terms of square footage per custodian. Anyway, it looks like there's maybe some flexibility to kind of shuffle some things around and then backfill in the custodian rather than the maintenance.
And that's kind of how this opening came, is that they were able to take that custodian, move some of that time to the learning center, cover that piece, hire someone, for an hour to do central office, and now you have an opportunity to make a step towards a position.
One of the challenges with the number of buildings that we have, like that particular position, pre-K is way up Route 1.
Yep.
Learning center's down here. It's, there's not going to be a complicated activity happening at both of those buildings on the same day. It's probably unlikely.
Correct. Okay, so we'll bring something back on Wednesday night with an idea around, something around facilities that would give us some clarity. During our last workshop, I looked at kind of those additional items and additional decreases that we'd kind of made at the superintendent's level. And I just really wanted to look at that sheet and basically get a feeling, is there like, are we starting to feel pretty good about that? Are we not feeling good? Is there something we want to talk about a little bit more on that piece? Is there an ad that we don't, just trying to be prepared for next Wednesday night.
I guess on the addition piece, is that then where the 500, or whatever the total is for the SMS, I don't know, maintenance, or however we want to categorize that, would that be included here as a separate?
So I would probably bring that as a separate piece. I would just, these are just more like that during that first draft, like, are we good with those things? Because, you know, what's, in certain places, like you take social worker, for example, the earlier we can advertise for what we know is going to be a retirement, and that, you know, you guys have, and we would advertise as anticipated to get that process moving. If we look at resiliency coordinator at SMS, like, okay, if that's going to be in the budget, let's think about that anticipated opening, because hiring will be difficult this year, as it is in every profession. And if one of our internal people makes that jump, that then opens something else up, and that snowballs, and now it's August, and I think our principals are really looking forward to being able to do those things. So if we came through like Wednesday night, kind of, or tonight, you guys saying, okay, yeah, we're pretty solid on this type of stuff, and then we get to Wednesday night and we're kind of solid again, we would probably look at starting to post some of those positions as anticipated when we've talked about position reallocation of finding alternative education teachers at the middle school. Like, there are some people who are very interested in doing that position, which might make some other shifts that happen in the district. And then, you know, anyone who's a math teacher, a science teacher, or special education teacher, those are really hard to come by.
So would we anticipate for next Wednesday numbers for some of the ideas that have been tossed around tonight to appear up in the green section?
So I could do it either way. We can say we're good at this piece right now moving forward. We can put this back again. I was kind of thinking that for a lot of the stuff, I'd come with kind of a separate item for each of them. Like the maintenance piece, that feels like a separate item to me. The pre-K special ed feels like a separate item. This stuff was kind of in the superintendent's budget. I see this as, you know, unless you want to pull something out individually and get more information, I would see this as a chunk. But just trying to get your thoughts on how you want to proceed. Want to be prepared for your Wednesday night.
I mean, I think this looks good. Just one question, though, and
Yep.
I should have asked this maybe earlier, but it's just kind of dawning. Can you talk a little bit about this vocational funding for TA students?
Yep.
Just it's surprising to me that it's essentially the same as the increased TA tuition.
Yeah, and that's
What does that cover?
That's just straight up, the same as straight up coincidence. So, talking a little bit about vocational funding. So vocational funding comes to a center, whether it's Biddeford, Sanford, whatever, directly to that hosting organization. There's an amount of subsidy that comes in, and then there's your operational cost of the center. several years ago, and this is how this came to be here, we talked about it last spring, is that the state used to say to a community who hosted a center, here's your subsidy, you'd spend your money, and then 2 years later, you would get reimbursed what you spent. So if the cost for operations 1 year was less than subsidy, you knew that money was coming, so it really wasn't a problem. It was just more about Biddeford saying, yeah, we can wait for the catch-up. Pretty simple. Actually, it was a pretty good formula because it also allowed you to handle some capital improvement things, and you knew you were getting your kind of your money back on that. They switched to an EPS formula at the state that they've been kind of moving us into over time. What it's done is it's created a gap between the cost to run the center and subsidy. But now there's no ability to catch that up without going to each local municipality for the number of students that attend the center. So from the position as of the host in Biddeford, they have a big majority of students are Biddeford students because, again, walking across the driveway makes it pretty easy. Right now, I think Saco has in the neighborhood of about 65 students that come over to the center. Dayton's got, I think, 17, 19. Arundel has, 7 or 8. 21 has that, and in Old Orchard Beach. And so what we proposed last year is that gap that exists, which I think this year it was like a gap of under $200,000 for everybody, that you'd look at the gap, you'd look at how many students you had enrolled, and each community would pay their share of the gap. And so based off the information of projections of current enrollment and that spread, that's where the 32,000 would come up, that if, with the 65 students from Thornton Academy, that's where it came from.
It was 25 in the last budget that we had
Yeah.
from last year, so probably reflects a few more students than we had.
Yeah, I mean, as those costs goes up and subsidy goes down, and, it's hard to figure out, what we have here is we run a year behind so that we can lock in that number, and what that cost would be versus what the enrollment was, so that it's not a situation in October or November where, let's say your enrollment went up for a reason, that then you'd pay a bigger share. We just operate a year behind so that it's a lock cost.
And who operates the center? Is it?
So the center
We?
is operated by Biddeford.
Okay.
And that's where that funding, like if you look at page 5 of their 279, you'll see a vocational funding line that comes in, it's a little over $3 million. And so all of that stuff gets operated by Biddeford, just like the other vocational center in York County, Sanford. Sanford superintendent operates that. Westbrook superintendent, they do the Westbrook one. But then, if you want to talk about vocational and statewide, there's something, the difference between centers and regions. Centers are linked to particular school departments. Regions operate independently, kind of have their own board, their own piece, and then everybody pays into those. So I'll bring back this sheet separately. Does that work for everybody? And we'd vote on this piece as kind of a group. Okay.
So when we do it that way, if the other, 2 or 3 items, whatever it ends up being, come as separate items, we would move those each individually. And then, I guess the question that I have with respect to this, to the spreadsheet is, this does a really nice job of, taking the increases and decreases and, distilling it down to, one final number. Is it possible to have that also be part of the?
Maybe what I'll do is I'll set these up in one spreadsheet, and I'll move some
different
things
tabs.
around, say like, okay, if you take this, if you take item one in this category, it would do this, it will do this, so that, again, we're not talking about huge money in either way, but Jason can calculate that piece pretty quickly so that we can get ready for the next Monday night.
Because I'm anticipating that when we get to the council, they'll probably start asking questions like that.
Yep.
And I know the process that they've used in the past involves a add, remove, this is what it looks like type of process.
Yep.
I don't know, I mean, I feel like maybe we should just add the SMS maintenance budget, just because, you know, the city councilmen have gone and done the tour. They're all aware of what we're trying to do. I mean, it just seems to me like we should just add it in there and show them what it would look like. I mean, I get what you're saying, but like, I mean, we can show them on the computer screen what it would look like immediately, or we could just present it that way.
Yeah, let me think about how I can set that up the best way visually for us.
Yep.
As we took on that, as it does seem to, maybe I can just, yeah, we can move on to that piece. I'll come back to bus right. As we look at the painting and furniture, just to kind of give you an update, as asked Mike to start kind of looking at what quotes for certain parts of painting would look like so that we could have a good conversation with the city council. We've also reached out to some vendors on furniture that are going to bring in some samples for us and also try to give us a little bit of detailed pricing on what that would look like.
Yeah, that was my next question, is how many vendors we were able to get that furniture
So,
from?
We're working with, I can't remember, the school, something or something. They deal with a lot of different vendors. And there's some products we've used in the district before that we, at other schools, we've really liked this vendor. One of the pieces that is important to me is that we have an ability for teachers to look at the product first. There are some, they're called flow desks, which are neat, they kind of have different shapes to them, so that it could be a situation where I'm working by myself at my desk that has this unique design. But if the teacher wants the 5 of us to get together, they fit together in a perfect circle. So you might order 20 desks for your room that can be spaced in rows like probably most of us sit in, or they can be 5 tables that only take up, I think it turns into like a 60-inch table, you know. At the same time, I also want us to be able to have a look at like a table seating like this that would fit two kids, because I think there's going to be, what's going to be interesting about SMS is when you guys walked around, you notice that some rooms are configured one way, some are a little longer and narrower. And so when we worked with the company the other day, they had brought us a sample of each, and I said, no, I need to see what 5 desks look like, so the teacher, you know, if we need to move them up to a similar room and you put 5 together, because you think about our team structures that are there, and you got someone who's teaching in a science room that's got the science for, they're going to need stools in those rooms. When we have some of our, you know, other teams, they might want teachers working, they might want groups together. We look at like the current health room, the health teacher has big round tables in there. So we got to kind of look at that piece and see what it's at. But we got some numbers so that we could actually say, like, if we need 400 desks and 300, well, we won't get 300 tables, but 100 tables, it would be able to put a price, but we're just not quite there yet. But it's going to be, I would say that furniture in that building would be approximately $250,000.
Is that including the tables in the library and teachers' desks?
Includes teacher's desk.
Okay. So none of the furniture in the library?
Not yet. But again, they were working off an estimate that might have been all desks, and desks might be a little bit more expensive than there's an option where someone wants tables, so that's the piece that we've got to kind of hammer out, and Jeff Rodman's working with Meg on that piece of saying, okay, what would those counts actually look like if we were able to go ahead with this? And again, that means that by the end of we were hoping that at the end of this week, early next week, we would have the other 4 desks from the company that we could sit up there. I also wanted a kind of a standard series so that people could say, okay, if we wanted to be like we always were, this is what you would get. If you want to have this vision, you would get this. If you have this vision, you would get this. And then calculate those up, because other people may have different feelings about what they want in their rooms. So we're a little bit out on it, Artie, but getting closer.
So do you feel like we'll have an answer back before the joint meeting?
Probably not a full answer back.
Because I hate to submit a number to the council if we're not even sure if that's the number that's going to work.
I think we have roundabout numbers.
Yeah.
I think that, we still will have some time between, as we go to the 9th and we look at health insurance, we know that we'll be back in front of the council making probably an adjustment one way or the other on that, which may play into this situation. And hopefully we can talk, I think everyone that we've spoken to so far recognizes the challenge that we face up there and seems somewhat enthusiastic. If, you remember, there's us and there's the city side, if it all can work together financially, I think there are some people who definitely recognize the challenge that we face, and they're excited to help. I guess the last piece before I get on to anything else that you guys would like to bring forward is just jumping back up to that bus rate program that I've sent you a couple of videos for. That's not in the budget yet, but the more and more I look at this program and watch the videos, and if it delivers, the more and more I really like it. And I know that this sounds strange, but the last one I sent you guys about like the parent's ability to follow the bus, like where it is, and the ability for the program to set an alert that says, okay, I get a notification on my phone that says the bus is 10 minutes away. As I think about the changes that Congress possibly will make around daylight savings time, I don't know if any of you guys are watching that piece or saw that if that goes through the mornings time here in Maine, then our number of days after 6 o'clock with light drastically increases, but also our morning times with less light after 7 decreases. Okay, so our days are going to kind of go up, not down. If that passes, I really like that idea of being able to say, okay, I'm not going to have my kid waiting out in the dark. I know it's 4 minutes away. I think it's a great customer service tool. I think it's a great routing tool. I think as we look at substitutes who will be driving buses and to be able to have turn-by-turn directions of a route, it is, the more buses that we add to this, we can get a price where it's about $700 a year a bus that comes with the technology. We're at under $20,000. I think this is a pretty darn good program for us to look into. Because if you think of operationally, where are the most difficult challenges sometimes with how we service the community, and that can be transportation.
I have a silly question. Is there any kind of grant funding or any kind of that kind of stuff out there for things like this in the universe?
So we've got a call into the DOE that we haven't heard back from yet. Because they have supported Versatrans as a kind of a state transportation system. And I want to try to ask them if they consider alternatives. May not happen the first year, may happen after they look at that piece. There's just a lot of different features that we've set with that, are exciting to me. The fact that, any of our trips that are, let's say, an athletic trip, or we send kids to robotics competition that's in Bangor. If you use the program 100%, you could have a situation where you're a parent and you're following that bus trip back from Bangor on a Saturday for, you know, you're not sitting at school waiting or texting, like, you know where it is. Show you upcoming trips, so it could help with the scheduling. Working with a company, one of the features it doesn't necessarily have is all the fields that we'd like to have for billing, but they're very open to, they're not working a lot in the state of Maine, and they're very open and seem to be a very flexible company to say, okay, what do you really need? The other piece that I find that's amazing with it is being able to say, like, let's say Jeff calls me and says, hey, I'm worried about the safety at my bus stop, you know, whatever. We can immediately pull up that drop-off and go directly to Street View on Google Earth, so that, you know, you can say, oh, yeah, that makes sense that, Jeff, there's a hill that you can see, and it doesn't make sense for his kid to be, you know, picked up at the bottom of the hill. We want to back it up a little bit. Those are things that, boy, it's very integrated. Takes some time, I'm sure, obviously, to maximize all the usage like any of the programs do, but it's quick and it seems pretty good, and that would be something I'd like to bring forward to say, this makes a lot of sense for us.
Is that a recurring cost year over year?
Yep.
Have you gotten any feedback from transportation staff, or?
So I met with Mike and Jeannie on that, and we've gone through a couple of those, and you know, I think like with any program, you're a little overwhelmed at first when you look at it, and there's all the things and questions that Jeannie would have about what she's used to using. That's where a lot of the billing questions came in. This is definitely a situation where you got to put some time into building it right. Also building it right through our student information system to make sure that those two programs are talking to each other all the time. So, you know, like this hesitancy with changing things over, I just see this as very public facing. And what we have right now isn't very, you know, there's none of that public facing piece. The ability, you know, what I think, while there's a lot of work that gets put in over the summertime, to be able to use one program, and if, you know, a parent registers on that, and to be able to push out a message to all kids on that bus immediately that says, bus 10 is delayed by 10 minutes, the amount of man hours that creates for our secretaries and Jeannie on those types of calls, especially when you think of, like, you know, we all know that the first week of transportation at the beginning of the year is no matter what, it's going to be challenging because you've got new pre-K kids, you've got kindergarten kids, the bus routes, you're adjusting the traffic patterns in town, and just to be able to push that push notification out seems like just so ideal to me. And then there won't be the need for one parent to get the call, put it on Facebook before the next parent gets the call, or the ability, like right now, we have to go to, you know, you're looking at the bus system, you're on the phones, and now you're over here on that our instant alert system, and it just takes so much time to enter those messages that by the time you send out that communication and it takes 7 or 8 minutes to build it, the bus is already 2 minutes away for a 10-minute delay, and you've had 40 phone calls. That to me is just, if used effectively, that would be worth its weight in gold right there.
No, I think it's pretty cool. I think we should consider it. That's just my thought. Knowing as a parent, when I put my kid on the bus, I had an independent tracker so I could keep track of her on my phone as she goes throughout the bus. So it'd be nice I think it'd be super user-friendly for parents, especially new parents coming into the district. So that might be something worth definitely looking at.
Yeah, if I was, you know, I am a parent of a young kid, and, you know, I understand that pieces, and, you know, there's the days you're screaming out of work to make sure you hit the bus stop, and, you know, sometimes you get there and you're like, oh, did it go already? I missed it, you know. I would know if you're a parent and you're gonna be 5 minutes late for that bus stop, you're gonna know immediately whether you're gonna make it or not. So I just think it's just safer all around, and, you know, looking at a price that's around $20,000 to be public facing on things like that. If we can get the DOE to buy into some of those, you know, because they buy some of those, we gotta push them to understand this. And again, might not happen year one, but if there's a lot of users who start doing it, then they might say, well, make a choice. We can offer 2 up.
So, question around the licensing and all that, is there a cap on the number of people that, or is there like a scale of how many people out in the world can be using this app? That changes the cost?
So the more buses I can add to this, if I can purchase this with both districts, we will drop our price. And kind of, I think that we've also negotiated a situation that if we're one of the early adopters, and I can work on bringing other groups into the contract, we can continue to take it lower.
So from an initial standpoint, 100 parents signed up to use the app, doesn't cost us any
No,
more or
no,
less
no.
than 1,000 parents signed up. to
Correct.
use the app. Okay.
It's all, that price is, there's no additional on that piece.
What is the cost for it right, straight out right now? Is, you said 20,000?
It's gonna be about 20,000. We've got to look at a little bit, and that's why I get some information, because I think that we would want to also make sure this is on our special education transportation vans for some of our out-of-district runs. That piece, the other piece that, you know, I often wonder when I look at transportation is that if we can get the system to add stops to this route is very quick and easy. You know, it's kind of like pinpoint here, and it's like just shoots the route out for you. What I always have wondered is when you look at Industrial Park, if you're on Industrial Park Road at about between 2:30, 3 o'clock, you will see about 7 or 8 different school departments run through that section with vans. And I've always been fascinated by saying, okay, if you had the information and you had really good routing program, could you reduce or share some of those rides if appropriate? And I know that Jeannie and Audrey have been talking, because it makes 0 sense to take a van from Biddeford or Dayton and drive to X, say Morrison Center, and then also have one going from Saco if you could make it work. Like, those are places where we could find efficiencies very easily, and kind of being able to, you know, if you had people who, again, if it's not cumbersome and you have the ability to share information, then it helps with those greater collaborations of saying, oh yeah, this does work, or maybe I only need to get to the park and ride, and then we can run something from the park and ride to wherever and share that cost. Those would be things that we'd be looking for. So I think it's really important, you know, again, as well, if you're a parent who has specialized transportation for your kiddo coming from Portland down, having the ability to know, you know, whether it's on a snow day or you know, a day where it's tough travel, you're gonna know where that route is, and a parent would only have access to their assigned kiddo. I just see no drawbacks on this one, other than implementation. They're always hard.
How is the Biddeford committee feeling about this? Because
Yeah,
I'm assuming you're presenting it to them as well.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead.
Okay, and do you have a time frame of when you plan on doing it over there?
We are planning to start in the fall.
Okay, so I think we can probably all agree that we're on board with it, right? Yeah, I would like to have numbers, with the 2 districts put together.
Yep.
And I think it's definitely beneficial to get their surroundings put in.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can gain momentum, people will like the product, and then you can kind of push it out.
Suppliers like volume, makes sense.
Yep.
Give me one question on the routing side of it. Do they, and I don't expect you to know the question, but, the answer, but is the routing, is it just optimizing the distance, or do they take in, there's a program called Streetlights, which is like a real-time traffic that uses Bluetooth from phones. Do they fold that into that routing as well, do you know, or, I mean, again, it's a
So
tough
what,
question.
from I wouldn't have the answer to that piece, but from what I see, this runs very much off like a Google mapping system, which would do that for you. Seems very integrated that way. Even like the search piece, like if I'm building route from Saco Middle School to Bonnie Eagle Middle School, you know how like when you're typing the addresses, it almost comes up like, when I type Bonnie Eagle, it's almost like that Google piece. So I'm saying that my assumption is that it's building in all of those layers through that. I'd have to ask that specifically. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, this one's pretty flexible. These are, the company is very much a team of newer age digital natives that have built this. Looks good.
With, going back to the data that we're gonna be handing over to make that happen, what are I'm assuming that they're used to working with school departments
Yeah.
and school-age children and
Yeah, they've got.
privacy and
Yeah,
all of that.
they work with school departments, Massachusetts, New York, New Hampshire, that area. They've got plenty of them on board. And again, we would have that system and it'd just be our routing system talking to our student information system locally. Okay. Any other items that kind of through the board that we've been through that we haven't talked about or you want to talk about, so we're prepared for next discussion on Wednesday night?
Is that going to also include the capital piece? Because there's the ADA discussion for the restrooms.
So-
Is your plan to talk about that too, or?
So you guys will have an agenda item for revolving renovations. And so my recommendation to you guys is going to approve all revolving renovation projects so that we can move ahead with the question on the ballot. You have some time before you have to, like, you can vote to do it and then not do a project. And that just lowers your loan balance. I think that we need to have that discussion once we know a little bit more about what we're going to be into for a school. So we're probably going to know that more by that October, November time, or well before that, for it to get on, if we can get on this ballot. So we've got some time to have that discussion. But it would be all-inclusive initially. So we would vote to make sure that it was in the package, and then make those, once we, again, if the decision is to rehab Fairfield School as part of the project, then that would be like, yeah, that makes sense to do that on that. If it's not, then it might not be, it makes as much sense.
Right, and so just to clarify, because I think I know why you're asking the question, those decisions around that funding is decoupled from this budget. It's like, we don't have to make decisions for that in order to affect the number that we're gonna go to the council with.
We will
They're
go with the full number we will go with the maximum, but you may not access all of that. So that full number of, I think the payment is, say, $75,000 a year for the total piece. That would be in that because the public has to vote on that number. Whether you borrow the 75,000, the payment up to 75 might be a different story. If that makes sense.
It sort of does. So the number that we're talking about, so from a ballot standpoint, these are two completely different
Decisions.
ballot questions.
So no, you'll have one ballot question for all revolving renovations funds.
And one one for this budget. That's
and
what-
one for this budget, but the payment for that bond fund is in the budget
this budget.
at the full amount. So you'll vote at the full amount, and then, once we decide what the school is, well, we should do the doors over at Fairfield anyway. Obviously, we'd be doing the doors and the HVAC project at the middle school. The only piece would be the ADA piece, and off the top of my head, it's 300,000-ish, let's say. You may wait to not start that project until we have a full decision on what the plan is for our elementary buildings. You don't have to complete those projects until September of '23, which most of the work wouldn't even be done this summer anyway, because the time's not there to set it up. You'd be doing everything the next summer, and you just would, let's say, either opt in or opt out, and if you opted out, you just wouldn't be borrowing as much money.
Would we ultimately change, so just following all the way through, so we go with this budget, with the full amount, that goes through to June.
Yep,
Gets approved.
yep.
We then have one for the bond to cover this.
Yep.
And I guess the question that I have is, if that number changes, does that bond question change? Or is it still the full amount?
It's still the full amount until you don't accept something. And all we would do is adjust our payments in other years. So an example would be is that we had some, prior to going out for COVID, in Bedford, we were awarded a couple of revolving renovation funds. Actually, we were on ADA. And 2 weeks later, we went out of school for the rest of the year. Couldn't have anybody in our buildings. Got back in the fall, and everyone was kind of operating like, okay, you don't bring guests into your buildings and do those pieces. So we had a couple of projects that we just didn't do, even though we had the opportunity to, and just borrowed less. And the main bond bank just worked with you, because by the time the 18 months was up, we had no ability to do that. The other thing that worked in those against us is that when we were doing applications in 2019, building projects were at one amount, and then 2021 come, it wasn't even close. And we were like, okay, now we go back to the drawing board. So, I mean, that could happen here, up or down for us in any of these projects, is we could get to a point where we're putting forward what we have estimated, and then when bids come back, anything that's above that amount that's approved would have to be a local decision. So you may have a decision here, Kevin, where the door projects, let's say it comes in $10,000 more than what was allocated. You'd have to make a decision locally, are you going to do that or not? And so you would have you might decide not to do the ADA stuff, and then you'd have money at least built in to cover some of those costs.
All right, so to summarize from what we've been through, so for Wednesday night, we should get some numbers and some details for bus rate, some numbers and some details for what maintenance position change would look like. Same is true for pre-K.
Yep.
And SMS painting and furniture. Did I miss anything?
Painting and furniture would be pretty global.
So something that bothered me during the tour was the floors. The floors are very bad at SMS. And obviously, that's not something that we're going to be able to tackle during this budget. But I didn't know if maybe it'd be a good idea to, like, set aside some money to, in this budget to help us in the future budgets. I didn't know how people felt about that, but I figured I'd mention it.
I think it's one of those global SMS things anyway, that it's part of the, there's deferred maintenance that's probably affected the floors as well over time. But, I mean, we were having that conversation out on the, out on the sidewalk afterwards, and I think one of the questions that I know you raised was, well, we're gonna bring in a whole bunch of desks and tables that are brand new, and if we were to set money aside and do stuff with the floors, we're, gonna probably have to do some of it again, because we're gonna bang them all up in the process of doing some of that stuff. So, but I do agree that there's definitely some pent-up need for a lot of that stuff. Floors is one thing, walls is another, ceiling tiles, I mean, there's a multitude of things that really do need to be addressed.
I think once if we're lucky enough to get an amount in and start with one project, then it's easier to start talking about the next year, say, okay, how much would we need?
Right, and that was depending on the furniture and the painting, and if it comes in a lot higher, I don't know, it was just a suggestion. I mean, rather than having to tackle it all, because we don't know what's actually gonna happen in the next couple of budgets, we could get hit with a curveball. But if we tucked away like $50,000 towards it, I didn't know if we had that wiggle room or if we felt comfortable with that, but I mean, to me, I'd rather prepare for something that I would like to do than just try and deal with it when it gets there.
I think the other piece that you guys have to remember is that last year, you guys were able to put $500,000 into a roof that's sitting in the budget from last year. And we're gonna do a chunk of that this summer. And then we've got another $500,000 in this budget to handle roof and the next section of the roof, and to offset some of those costs for revolving renovations. Another cycle, you're gonna be done with the roof, and then you have that amount of money in there that hopefully could then coincide with some of the desk pieces, some of the other pieces, and say, okay, now that we have this plan of $500,000 in here, how do we cycle through that roof and start attacking some of those other issues? In addition, as we make decisions in 3 years about where pre-K is as part of the school project, we also have to remember that you have a fairly substantial lease payment that's part of that pre-K thing, and you will make some decisions as a community. So there may be some pockets of funds over time that don't necessarily raise the budget, that we can see in the next 3 or 5 years, that we could kind of time this out and take some significant chunks of things away. I also, as I talked about, as we get to the end of this year and seeing what we have left for carryover and other pieces, that may be an opportunity for us to plan by using some of that stuff. Because one of the pieces we will want to be careful about is, let's say you have a high level of carryover this year. And in this budget, I think you've got $200,000 in carryover, which in the past we've kind of been zero or negative. So we've got to come back with that number, not to create a cliff. Let's say we have $700,000 in carryover. That might be a perfect opportunity in the next budget to line up your carryover with an expense. So if you looked at the difference between the 300 and the 700, maybe there's a $400,000 expense in that year that you would want to chip away at, so that you're not creating some carryover cliff in the future, but you're spending it when you know you have the revenue to offset the expense. I think we can make some big strides in the next couple of years by working, good here, having our mind on it, being committed to it. And, I got the sense that there were some counselors who were pretty committed to it too. They were enthusiastic. I think they want to help us solve problems.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. I didn't even consider the 500,000 for the roofs. That makes perfect sense. I get where you're coming from.
It would be nice to be able to get into a pattern, and it feels like we're sort of heading that way, where we do think about those things out a little farther and, do, a lot of the things that ended up as deferred maintenance that we just brushed aside, that they get inserted, in a more planful way, and so that we don't end up with, a whole chunk of stuff that has to get done all at once. It'd be nice to have it in, just be part of the way that, things are done. And I mean, obviously we need people and the funding has to be there, but, it'd be nice to not have to have things accumulate for so much time that you've got this giant thing you can't manage.
I think one of the things that we have to really be disciplined on, and I know it's very difficult, is that when times become tough, that you don't go to that well. You just can't do it because it only costs you more. I mean, I was having a conversation with a superintendent, assistant superintendent in the area in southern Maine yesterday, and they called me because they knew I had done a project that they were looking at that was fairly apples to apples, and we had done it in 2019. And they said, "What did you spend in 2019 for that?" And I said, "Oh, give me a second, let me go to the computer," and I pulled it up, and we were at like, say, $320,000. And their quote for the similar type project was at like $675,000. And so, and we kind of laughed like, "Whoa, wow, what a pickup in just 4 years' times." And it's all things that you've seen the materials just skyrocket on. And so I think that's the piece that for us is really important, is that when you get into those tough times, how do we become disciplined enough to be like, no, even if it means like keeping the money there and not doing the project and saving it, because there are certain times that you might want to do that. Like, you know, again, anything that involves steel or metal right now, you might say, let's just hold off a little bit and see if the prices come around, or, you know, sometimes those, it doesn't necessarily hurt to save, and, you know, there are some things that a few years, you know, last year, anything that we were running 2x4s for, we didn't necessarily want to do immediately. We wanted, you know, look at something else, and then wire costs and everything, like, so like now the electrical side is through the roof, or PVC pipe is through the roof. Now it might be time to do something that's on the list, if you have a good list, and a good thing to say, well, you know, number 7 makes a lot of sense right now just because of material costs versus number 3.
Yeah, we've had a list. You know, Mike maintains a list that he's had every year that.
He has a good
I
list.
can never remember, it's a great list. The problem is we always raid the funds when things get tough. And we just don't end up doing them.
Yeah, Mike has a good list, and he has that piece. We just got to be disciplined to look through that, while also making sure that we keep an eyeball on where this elementary project's going to go, so that we're not just not doing something that then's not going to be used.
Speaking of that, when is the next construction meeting or public hearing?
So we'll probably be a couple of weeks out. We met with the DOE the other day to talk about, we'd had the site selection, I think, site inventory was right before last school committee meeting. We had some conversations with the DOE about the number of sites they may fund for us to do vernal pool testing, because that's coming up very quickly. We're thinking that once we get the full information on that, the next public meeting would be talking more about what the 3 possible sites would be. We've also set up a schedule just to try to move things along a little bit better, where every 2 weeks, Meg and I will be meeting with the school construction team with Oak Point at the DOE, just to try to push some things along a little bit. We're gonna do kind of every other one will be a Zoom the next time they wanna have the in-person meetings there. And so I would say that probably right after April vacation, we'll be looking at a big push to have that next site piece, because we're down to about 3 possible sites.
How does that final selection get made?
For the site.
Yeah, for the site. Once you've got the 3 main ones and you have your public hearing,
So you'll have
who raises their hand to say, okay, it's us? Okay. I was just curious, like, if it was the site committee that comes back and says, this is our number 1 pick, and then we vote on that? Or is that like a?
So the site selection committee, the next piece of that would be kind of, we've started to see the general locations. I think in the last meeting, they put a great slideshow together the other day, which would be part of the next public meeting, once we're down to kind of those 3, and say, here's what it is, you're waiting on some testing. Let's get some feedback about which site, what are all the pluses and minuses. I think the site selection committee would then take that feedback from parents, public, whoever that is, and then they would make a recommendation to you guys as a board to kind of lock that in, and at the same time working with the program group to get them down to a lot of decisions in a short amount of time, and they're very big decisions.
When do you anticipate we'd be voting on something like that? Would it be,
I think that by June, we probably could be, maybe before then. I mean,
Okay.
what would be, like, I can't have you vote on a final site until that vernal pool testing comes back, because we need to know if it's a viable site. And that's why we're testing up to 4 sites here, because our concern is that, because their window to test is this spring, and our concern being like, what if 2 of them came back and they were like, no good? We can't wait another year.
And do we have a time frame on the vernal pool testing?
Yeah, it's done in April and May. It's
Okay.
the only time of year that you can do it.
And not to continue down the non-agenda item, but the site selection recommendation is going to go basically hand in hand with what the program committee has put together, right? Because it's, those two things are intertwined for square footage and things like that.
I'm gonna say yes and no. Because a lot of it would be site dependent on buildable acres. So if our sites come back that could handle everything, like all of the program options, there may be a situation where we come to you quicker with the site. And the reason that we would do that is because sites just keep falling out from under us. That's our biggest concern. We will try to bring them somewhat parallel, somewhat at the same time. But let's say we test 4 and there's only one that's feasible, we better jump quickly.
Back to the facilities discussion and the preventative maintenance, the lead testing.
Yep.
I know, well, from what I've gathered, the state still hasn't really put any sort of funds or anything behind the requirement for all schools to test. But is that something, as we move forward, not only us as a school department, but around the state, can be pressuring in Augusta that they need to put money behind this, because now we may or may not have a problem, but we won't have any funding to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did that testing during February vacation, and we haven't got the results back yet, because every school department is now, doing the same. Everyone was looking at, February vacation, what a perfect week. The other piece that's come right behind that is there's also the radon testing by 2025. That's another one that has to be. There is some grant funding that we're exploring on the startup of that piece, that they put some money behind, but the lead testing results come back, and we may be dealing with a challenge very immediately. Again, just another one of those things that is all important, and we all should be doing it. But as those requirements come down, it's $2,500 in the budget. It's not free. Something we have to add up every year.
It's not the 2,500 to do the test, it's what comes after. That really gets you.
And, we do have some buildings that are a little bit older than others. We do have public water here, which will be a little bit more helpful to us in this situation. But you could have a drinking fountain somewhere that comes back as a positive or higher than that, and now you're tracing that back. It's going to be interesting to see what this all pans out to be.
Anybody have anything else? Okay, I think that's it for tonight.
Okay, see you Wednesday night.